shines that sunlight right back into space, to even larger things like launching barriers into space that can reduce the amount of sunlight that can reach the Earth. Notably, the World Economic Forum was promoting one of those programs. Now, look, I know some of this sounds kind of far out, but remember, there were experiments like this conducted in Mexico a couple years back. Researchers in Mexico, every U.S. company, they were basically inspired by the 1991 volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. That's kind of like the model a lot of this is based on. Volcano erupts in the Philippines. It sent massive amounts of sulfur dioxide into the air, killed a lot of people, but it also had the effect of reducing sunlight. And a lot of scientists looked at that and said, wow, that reduced sunlight, maybe we can use it to fight global warming. Some scientists want to replicate the effect of a volcanic eruption artificially. And they've actually tried it out on small scales already. Some companies already do it actively, and they actually use it to sell products, carbon credits, they call them. Now, the program ended up being so controversial, Mexico actually banned them. Popular Mechanics, January 2023, they said this. In late 2022, the startup Make Sunsets, that's the company, one of the companies doing this, announced that it was injecting small amounts of aerosols into the stratosphere as an experiment in solar geoengineering. It says the company released 2 weather balloons from Baja California. They were filled with less than 10 grams of SO2 each, not exactly Pinatubo levels, the volcano. But it said, but last week, the Mexican government banned the controversial deployment of any solar geoengineering efforts, citing a 2010 moratorium developed at a United Nations conference on biodiversity. It says Make Sunsets, the company, is already, as we speak, selling cooling credits. Remember this phrase, cooling credits. They sell them for $10 per gram of SO2, and it says a similar business model to the also controversial carbon offsets, carbon credits. Now, like briefly on this, a lot of people might say, oh, well, what does it matter? You know, you inject aerosols into the stratosphere, it goes away after a little bit. The reason these companies inject these things into the stratosphere and not the atmosphere, or like, you know, lower down, the reason they do that is because it actually does stay there. It can stay there for much, much longer. And so this actually does have a very long-term impact. Now, look briefly, though, on the note of these cooling credits, right? They call them cooling credits. The company's selling cooling credits by the gram. That doesn't mean that businesses are buying grams of, like, this chemical, right? The way it's done is this. They inject certain amounts of this stuff into the stratosphere, maybe X amount of grams, and then they sell that to companies to offset their carbon footprint, like hypothetically speaking, like a company sponsors it, basically. The way this works, this ties into the for-profit element of climate change. There's a huge business and a huge investment area around climate change. It's a money-making scheme when it comes to this. Basically, this is how it works. Companies can purchase what they call carbon credits, or in this case, cooling credits, and they can use those credits to reach what they call net zero, meaning they have zero emissions. That doesn't mean that they actually emit nothing. It actually means that they just offset it by purchasing these grams or whatever else credits from these companies. An oil company, for example, that is determined to have, an X amount of carbon emissions, they'll have to buy an equivalent amount of carbon credits or cooling credits to offset their emissions. So if they,
Not the first time I heard that one.
if they emit like 50 grams of carbon emissions every single day, they're going to have to buy 50 grams of carbon emissions or cooling credits from one of these companies. And these companies have all kinds of crazy things they do. There's all kinds of them. They basically look for ways where they can claim to reduce carbon emissions. That could be something like pulling carbon from the air. They have what they call carbon capture facilities, and they actually capture carbon, and then they use machines for it. They have these already built in the United States. There are proposals to cut down trees and bury the wood, under the narrative that if a tree were to hypothetically burn down in a forest fire, it would create a set amount of carbon emissions. Like, how many grams is a tree, right? And so they could say if the tree were to burn down, all of that, the tree, every gram of that tree would become a carbon emission. And so by cutting the tree down and burying the tree, they stop that carbon from being emitted, and then they can sell the weight of that buried tree as a carbon credit. This is how these companies work. They put together numbers for carbon credits or cooling credits, then they sell them to other companies. A lot of big corporations have to buy them, and even some states, by the way, in order to, again, have the net zero goal. It's a huge investment area. I actually know people who work in this area. It's a huge investment area. There's tons of money in it. And, some of these also get government funding, state subsidies in other parts of the world. It's not even just the U.S., it's like China and stuff. There are a lot of concerns around these programs themselves, like obviously, because some of these proposals, you don't really know the long-term effects of it. Like, what does it mean if you're pulling carbon out of the air? Like, what does that do to the area? There's also some companies that are a lot less credible. Because while you could say that maybe in the US there's certain environmental standards, some countries don't have that. And so in China, for example, they have like global warming fighting companies, and there's not a lot of stuff really vetting them. But companies can buy them and they count as credits, and so they can actually use this to offset it. Again, this is a huge business. This is part of how the whole net zero and climate change program makes money. It's a business. It's a huge investment area. A lot of investment firms are behind it. This is a huge money-making system under the narrative of climate change. That's how it works. And now look, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they announced just last week they're actually looking into these programs. They're concerned about them, specifically the company Make Sunsets. That's the company I mentioned before that's launching the balloons to inject sulfur dioxide into the air. The EPA said this in an official statement. It said the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA Office of Air and Radiation, OAR, submitted a demand for information to a startup company calling themselves Make Sunsets, which is launching balloons filled with sulfur dioxide, seeking to geoengineer the planet and generate cooling credits to sell. Again, they're selling them, right? It's a business. They say this issue was initially identified in 2023 during the last administration. The Biden administration actually did do some studies on this, but it said no action was taken to find out more about this questionable startup and activity. And it's an EPA Administrator Zeldin said, quote, the idea that individuals supported by venture capitalists, as I mentioned, there's a huge investment business behind this, are putting criteria air pollutants into the air to sell cooling credits shows how climate extremism is overtaking common sense. Lee Zeldin continues stating this. He said, based on Make Sunset's responses to our information requests, we will look into all our authorities to ensure that we will continue maintaining clean air for all Americans. Now look, according to the company's website, Make Sunsets, they've already launched around 147 balloons. It says they've delivered over 128,000 so-called cooling credits. Personally, I doubt this company is going to single-handedly cause a volcanic eruption type scenario where you block the sun. But the concern is if this continues spreading, right? And this is raising some questions over exactly what they've been doing, any potential impact these programs may have had on the environment. Again, there's not enough studies on this for long-term impact. They do state on their website, quote, we hope you'll join our journey by purchasing a cooling credit, signing up for our newsletter, or partnering with us. Let's work together to cool our planet for future generations. Now, to be clear, experiments like this have continued. This was not like a one-off thing. Just last year, for example, researchers tested a small-scale program in San Francisco, right here in the good old US of A, folks. The experiment was actually done on the deck of a U.S. aircraft carrier, and now Florida has taken actions to ban these things. A measure was passed in the Florida Senate, it's now in the House, and it basically prohibits any person or corporation from engaging in geoengineering or weather modification. and it makes it a third-degree felony if an aircraft controller or operator does this. It also has a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine, and it makes it generally illegal to inject or release chemicals or other substances into the atmosphere to impact the climate. While programs like this, though, are banned in Mexico, several U.S. states are looking to ban them. To be clear, they're not illegal everywhere. There are many areas in the world this is not illegal. Many areas in the world are doing it, and many areas in the world are looking to experiment with it. The United Kingdom, for example, again, they are now moving forward with experimenting on solar geoengineering to quote-unquote dim the sun. Now on to another topic. The first criminal charges of terrorism against a Venezuelan gang member has now been brought forward by the Department of Justice. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.